with Good afternoon. What's your name and title?
My name is Louis Cole. I'm the executive director of the Now Theater Workshop Incorporated, located here in the city of Patterson.
And what is the Now Workshop?
Now Theater Company is an African American theater art educational organization that continues to bring the African American culture to the city of Patterson, the state of New Jersey included.
And how did you get involved in the arts?
In the arts, actually, the way that I got involved in the arts go back many years. In fact, when I was a young man who was born in the South, during the break or recess, they called it then, I and a few friends, we always loved doing impressions of the Amos and Andy shows then, because we couldn't go outside because it was raining. So when we were inside, we simply were very creative. And I didn't really know or comprehend what I was doing at that time until later on, which we'll get to, I guess, in your interview.
Who was Amos and Andy?
Amos and Andy was a show that was actually in the early, started in the early 1900s when it started. It was an African-American family, and they were members of the Elks. It was a lodge club. It was a lodge that they were members of. I'm talking about the Kingfish, in fact. But they had white actors who actually, I found out later on during my research, who actually portrayed those, the African American actors were actually portraying, because it was significant to the African American culture. And during the early days of the 1900s, of course, that was a form of entertainment for most African American families in the South, because that's, I would imagine, in the North as well, because that was one of the shows that was the breakthrough on television for the African Americans. So it's sort of like all we had, if you will.
When did you come to Patterson?
I came to Patterson in 1965, in fact. 1965, I came to Patterson. The summer, it was May 30th, 1965. And the way that I was just talking, interesting you should ask that question. I just spoke to my daughters recently about our legacy here in the city of Patterson, meaning my immediate family's legacy. We're part of the African American migration from the South to the North that started in the late 1800s. And the way that my family got here, or our contribution, me and my sisters, as you know my sisters, in fact, the way that our family arrived to Patterson was that our uncle, John Cole, who was my father's brother, what had happened, he had left the South the earlier days, early 1900s, for better opportunities as part of that African American historical migration, if you will. And he landed a job at the, you probably remember this, I just mentioned this to Jimmy recently, at the Latham Foundry on Market Street in Patterson. He started there in 1932, and he retired from there in 1957. So that's my family historical significance into the city of Patterson. So as the historical story goes, okay, okay. So as I was saying, after my Uncle John was here, then every summer, he would come back to the South and to visit us. And Um, and after my uncle, it was my oldest brother who came in 1957. He was David Cole. Then David Cole, after David Cole, then it was my oldest sister who came to Patterson, Julia Cole, who is now Julia McKenzie, but she's no longer in Patterson. She went back south. And then my sister Maddie, Maddie Cole Mathis, and then my sister Lottie Coles, and after that was my sister Eliza Coles, myself, and then my baby sister. And we remain here in the city of Patterson today with family members, a lot of nieces, nephews, and etc.
What was happening in Patterson in 1968?
68, I just have to speak briefly about what happened because I had just finished high school in 1968. In fact, I graduated, but I came here every summer to work, from 65. And I would go back to South, get money, save money to get my school clothes and et cetera. And then we'd go back to the South. Now, 1968, as I recall Patterson, there was industry had began to boom. Then the blue collar jobs had better hiring. We're doing better hiring African Americans, as I've noticed. In fact, and I had heard a lot about Dr. King's arrival here at Reverend Lagarde's church, and I knew Reverend Lagarde very well, in fact, by now. But I wasn't in attendance here, but I remember the mood and the feeling during that time was just, words to describe it would be very jubilant, uplifting, and pride. Yeah, that's what I remember in '68. And back to the blue collar jobs, like in the Bunker Hill section, I, in fact, was was the first African American at Whitco Chemical to be a chemical operator. And that was 1968. So that goes to show you, or us rather, that we all standing or stood on someone's shoulders. So that significant historical presence of Dr. King here had obviously began to spread into the community for the African Americans' culture.
Who brought Dr. King to Patterson?
I don't recall who brought Dr. King to Patterson. I cannot answer that question honestly. I do not recall who brought him here.
Did you have any personal connection in getting him here?
No, I did not.
Okay. What was the waiting time like in Patterson
The waiting time?
for Dr. King? What was it like that day?
It was, as I just said, the people had a feeling of more of the pride I just mentioned, and there was a sort of a breakthrough feeling there was a breakthrough feeling of the people, the African Americans in particular, okay, from what I knew about Patterson from the days of or times of Reuben Hurricane Carter and that whole movement with the Patterson and Newark boycotting to have better opportunities for African Americans. People was feeling a sigh of relief, if you will. Like, we have made an accomplishment. Yeah, this is an accomplishment. It's an achievement we have made. We have fought to make this happen, and now we're on our way for better opportunities for African Americans in the city of Patterson. That's the feeling.
Is that what they were feeling while they were waiting to see him?
Oh, when they were waiting to see him, it was like a quiet, a spiritual moment. It was a spiritual moment because it was a spiritual time. I'm sorry, yeah, that's what it was. They're feeling and waiting with patience, but there is it's like, the Moses feeling if I could just get close to him. That's the feeling that people had at that time. Like the Messiah has arrived. You know, it would be like if Jesus would come back to earth and all the Christians wanted to just touch his robe. You know, the proud, that feeling that they had is like, yeah, we've prayed for it and fought for it and struggled for it to happen, and now it has arrived, you know? So it was a very spiritual moment, a very spiritual and proud moment in time.
How did it personally affect you? What feeling did it have for you?
Well, the feeling it had for me was that when a dream has been realized or a fulfilled dream, that when you start a movement in a grassroots area like Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and Wyatt T. Walker and Andrew Young and them, when they started it and it manifested to where it was, then I realized the significance of starting your dream right in your community. And it could happen if you stayed on course, prayed, and worked hard and stay focused and was honest and to do the right thing in whatever that dream was, or the dream is, in fact, that it could, in fact, happen. So that's what it meant to me.
And when Dr. King left Patterson, what do you think the results of his visit was? What was the emotion of the people?
Well, I believe they were, when he left here, I think they felt the dream for the African American people. The African American people, those of us who are, and still, unfortunately, years after Dr. King has gone on, still in the trenches fighting for the cause and for the right and for equality for African American people. I again, to recap, I believe they felt during that time, yeah, we have arrived as a people to better, to better livelihood, for equality. That's what I believe the feelings were.
And when you learned about his death, how did that affect you?
Oh man, I was hurt, deeply hurt. I was deeply hurt, and to this very day, in fact. But then, as I thought about the Apostle Paul, when he said, now Dr. King didn't say this to me, but I believed he would have said, if he had an opportunity, or I was close to him, I think he would have did what the Apostle Paul said. I fought the good fight. I finished my course, and I kept the faith. And that legacy that he instilled in me, okay, I do everything within my power to pass it on to the youth and my community as a whole. That legacy left in me. But that was a very sad time for me. But the strength that I have now to continue the fight, and when I say to fight, I mean, you know, to get resources that it takes to enhance and to continue to reveal the legacy of a Dr. King, and so many of our others, including Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, and right here in Patterson, William Van Rensselaer, you know, and the Underground Railroad and the likes. Through my works, I am praying with the Dr. King legacy and spirituality within me that I continue those works because I think this is what he would want. So I want to continue to reveal these works so that my community could continue to have the pride that Dr. King and so many others, Fannie Lou Hamer included, so many other freedom fighters left here for us as a premise to build, to grow, and to continue the struggle, unfortunately, the struggle and the process for equality for African American people.
What is your personal overview of the situation today, then, and now? How do you feel about the changes his visit resulted in?
The changes. Unfortunately, I have to say that I believe his legacy doesn't ring out enough in our communities and in our minds. What am I saying? His historical significance and so many other African Americans, brothers and sisters who battled for the cause on the front line, in fact, I don't believe that our community is really well connected and balanced to those legacies that they left for us. So I would have to say that, unfortunately, the changes that we had, or that the struggle, or that we fought for during the 60s, during the movement, to me is beginning to disappear. To me is beginning to disappear. We still have homelessness. That affects African American people, the most part, in this city. We have housing problems. That affects mostly or mainly or primarily African American people in this community. We have health care issues, okay? That primarily affects African American communities. But I will say this, African American people. I believe that when we, and I must say this because I'm speaking from my heart and I'm very honest about this. I believe that when we as African Americans run for a political office and we get elected into that, or we, and the community, vote you into the office, okay, our councilman, our mayor, who just got elected, thank God, okay, I think they have to be held accountable more so than ever right now, because we don't want a token feeling to distract from reality. So, as I was saying, our elected officials shouldn't be apprehensive at all to exercise their authority and power when it comes to inclusion for the African American people. That's one of the things I've noticed in this city, okay, is that I've saw or witnessed a few African American elected officials who made it, got elected, and I'm not calling any names, but anyway, they didn't do so well in reaching back into the community of the African American people. Now, we know Dr. King believed in inclusion. He believed in the grassroots support. Inclusion, the grassroots inclusion. You know, because during the movement, we must not forget that he included SNCC, Stokely Carmichael, and the likes. You know, he included the late Malcolm X. You know, there was all an inclusion there. In other words, he didn't feel, in my opinion, that it was all about Dr. King. You see, and by inclusion, by including the grassroots community, your program for the African American people will, in my opinion, will definitely be more significant, and we could learn from observing the legacy of the late Dr. Martin Luther King and how he believed in inclusion.
What does the designation of this church as an historical building mean?
It means the world to the community. It means a lot to the African American community because, as I just mentioned, that we need venues, all the venues that we can get in the city of Patterson for our youths, as well as the grassroots community, to have a designated place that has expressed or continue to serve the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. So that designation would give us a place so that we could claim, and from here, then from this point, historical significance, it will, I believe, it will encourage the community even more to seek and research more about our significance in not only the today's in Patterson contribution, but going back to the beginning in 1792 when Patterson was established, and the Dutch, in fact, had slaves, owned slaves, in fact, and then in the 1800s, of course, and Silk City, then we started the Silk City, but we must remember that the Silk City wasn't so pleasant in the 1800s for those migrants, immigrants, African Americans who had migrated here from the South with those expectations. The mills, the silk manufacturer owners wasn't so pleasant to the African Americans then. And so this, and in fact, let me just complete, I'm sure that a lot of our youths and adults would be excited to know that there was an African from River Street, from Straight Street, I'm talking about River Street, from Straight Street to Main Street on River Street, there was that's where a lot of African Americans lived in the early 1800s, and in fact, the silk manufacturers had called it the African Horn. This is where they all lived during that time. So anyway, this would then open up a whole feeling of wanting to know more about our culture and history here in the city of Patterson. This would be the beginning of, or continuation rather, of a great thing for the African/African American people and our contributions in the city of Patterson. Not only were they weren't able to get jobs in the silk mills. Okay, so let's ask the question, okay, how were the African Americans treated in the early 1800s by the silk manufacturers, right? Now, the answer was, and historically, and documentation, in fact, states that they couldn't get jobs. They weren't hired in the silk mills. They only were able to get jobs in the foundry, in fact, where I mentioned earlier my uncle worked, and in the laundries like Spotless Cleaners and et cetera, where my sisters and them got jobs when they, kind of first came to Patterson. But that was established in the 1800s by those African/African American slaves who could not get job in the silk mills because the manufacturers wouldn't hire them during that time in Patterson. So again, I'm repeating myself, but this would be a significant starting point to actually integrate into the historical contribution to the city of Patterson. This would be a great starting point here to change.
As an art entrepreneur
Yes.
and an artist, a historian artist, how do you envision this church being utilized to spread the word to other communities?
Well, I'm glad. A good question. Now, when you designate it as the historical significance or the historical point venue rather for the African American people, if you have there's 300 people, okay, in this church, or I think that's the capacity, or let's say 500 here. You have all those numbers now. Now you're able to have the proper documentation here, the proper research team, like yourself, a writer. By the way, we must remember our writers play significant roles. Our writers and researchers play a significant role in helping to reveal this to our entire community. Because where does it start? There's a dream, as Dr. King did, and then there were the writers that put it on the paper so that others, African Americans, could share that, and people all over the world then got it from those, I'm going to say, chosen ones that had started the movement, or from its early days. And in fact, that's how I see this venue here, as spreading that word out into the community. And then what I will do as the, prayerfully, as I guess, the theater arts or one of the cultural people here in Patterson, along with Mr. Gil Benson, who has been with me for many years, okay? Then what we could do, after this has been established here, designated, then we could write a story or a play that revolves around that entire movement when Dr. King was here. In this way, we could capture some of those moments by people who were here, those who wasn't here, and how they were affected by it if we put it in a play form. And then, entertainment serves as a great tool to give messages and historical significance to our people, not only our people, but people throughout the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
Okay.
Great. It was really
Okay, my name is Louis.